Okay, thank you everybody for joining us for another virtual lunch and learn from Jane Irrigation. I'm Richard Restuccia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions at Jane, and it has really been my pleasure to be hosting these lunch and learns for the past month and a half, where we have been helping contractors, architects, dealers, growers still operate and learn while we're under well, what I like to say, safe at home conditions. So, and that's one thing I wanted to mention. We're talking about how long do we keep doing this? How much longer do we need to continue trainings? And one thing it sure seems like is that we're definitely in a time of change right now. And for all of us, whether we're working now as manufacturers or contractors, the way we're selling, the way we're communicating with customers is going to change. It has changed. And the ones that figured this change out first are the ones that are going to get bigger market shares. So certainly what we're talking about today with smart controllers is part of that technology that can help you connect better with your customers' controllers or your own controllers if you're putting smart controllers on jobs so that you can be more efficient. The other thing it's doing is saving customers money right now. And when we think back to 2008, 2009, the last big recession, one thing I know, I was working for a contractor then, Valley Crest. One thing we knew then is that customers wanted to save money. This was the first thing they wanted to talk about. So, and I know a lot of contractors are under a lot of pressure right now. I was talking to somebody last week, had $1 million a year maintenance job, and the person came to them and said, we need to talk about reducing my fees 50%, which is a horrible position to be put in, really non-negotiable. So we don't want anybody in those positions. We want them proactively going out to their customers and saying, let me show you some ways we can save you money right now on water. So one of the ways we do that is with smart controllers, and that's why today smart controllers is one of my favorite topics. And joining me today is our national sales manager, Andy Bellingary, who I've worked with Andy for a lot of years now. Andy joined Valley Crest right out of college. Andy got his horticultural degree from BYU, started as account manager, actually running crews at Valley Crest, moved his way up to sales position, did a great job as a business developer. And gosh, a little over 5 years now, Andy, I was able to, I was fortunate enough to have you come join us here at James. So Andy's a great talent, knows a lot about smart controllers, and we're excited to have him on today. So Andy, welcome. There, we got you now. We can hear you
All
now.
right, I was going to say you put everybody on mute, including me. I appreciate that introduction, Richard. Yeah, I just passed the 5-year mark with Jane, and it's been great. Yeah, so yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come and join you in this chat today.
Yeah. So Andy, you're sheltered in place today. Where are you calling from? Where's that shelter, and what's it like there?
So I am calling from my home in Henderson, Nevada, in the Las Vegas area, and my office, otherwise known as my cell, has been I've been hunkered down here for the past many weeks.
Great. So Andy, are people working there in Vegas, or contractors working?
Yeah, you're seeing some of them. Of course, the strip is shut down, so you're not seeing a lot of work out there. But I went to the Star Nursery, local garden supply shop here a couple of weeks ago. Took a lunchtime break, went out, grabbed a couple plants. It was jam packed. So I think while some people aren't working, everybody else is either busy working in their yards, but the contractors are staying busy, and I think it's starting to get even more busy right now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, listen, some of our format today is going to be a little bit of a back and forth conversation between Andy and myself, and we certainly want to include all of you in that as well. So, for those of you who are on Zoom, you can look at the chat and you can type in questions as we're moving along, and I'll be sure to work those into my conversation here with Andy. So, Andy, the big question today is, what really does make a smart controller smart, right? We hear a lot about smart controllers. I know some people there's a lot of varying degrees of smartness out there, right? And so for you, when you're thinking of a smart controller, what is like the first requirement a smart controller has to have to really be in that category of a smart controller?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. There's a lot of things that come to mind. Probably the first thing that comes to mind is, and I'll pause right there. I'm just going to back up a little bit and preface this answer with this. Every irrigation manager, every landscape contractor or account manager, anybody trying to do a good job at managing water typically has two basic questions. How much water does my landscape need? How often do I need to apply it? So with that in mind, a smart controller's got to be able to answer that question. So with that preference in mind, we then start to look at, okay, how do I separate the so-called smart controller from the controller that truly is smart? And the first thing that comes to mind for me, it's absolutely, you have to have the ability to make a daily adjustment. Now, there's a little bit more to that, right? And I'm going to put on my horticultural cap here for a second and then get into some, a little bit about some of these daily adjustments that are needed. It can't just be an adjustment on a whim. It needs to be an adjustment based on some sound science. The first thing I kind of think of when I think of sound science, I'm thinking of the horticultural aspect of the plant and soil relationship. Your smart controller, when it's adjusting daily, it needs to know what kind of soil you have. A sand, water moves through sand differently than it moves through clay, right? So your controller has to know that. Your controller needs to know how deep those roots go into the soil. How that water is applied. Is it drip irrigation? Is it spray? Are they rotors? What's the precip rate? How quickly is it being applied? It needs to know what kind of plant material it is, as I mentioned. What about a slope? Is there a slope that's affecting that? Is the exposure, is it a northern exposure? Is it a southern or western exposure that may need a little bit more water? So all these things have to come into play for the controller to make a daily adjustment. So it can't just be, yeah, I'm going to adjust on a percent up or down, on a whim. I've got some sound science that's going into that. And it's not just the horticultural science that affects the daily adjustment. You need to make sure that you're analyzing weather data. The four basics that we talk about all the time are wind and temperature, humidity, solar radiation. Those are the four basic things that affect ET, or evapotranspiration, but there are 13 other variables as well that can affect it. So your controller has to be able to analyze that and say, okay, based on that, how am I going to adjust today? And not only that, it needs to be able to make those adjustments, not quarterly or monthly or weekly, but daily and maybe hourly even. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking of a smart controller, the ability to adjust very frequently, daily or hourly.
Yeah, so I think those are all great, Andy. So the one thing that just comes to my mind when I hear people talk about that is I say, well, okay, but is this based on historical ET that you're making your adjustments or real-time ET? And what's the difference between those two?
No, okay, so that brings up probably the second most important thing here. You have to be using real-time ET. There's a lot of so-called smart controllers that are taking 50 years of historical data. And they'll take that data and then they'll use it to manipulate a pre-programmed schedule up or down. Now, the problem with that is you're just, at best, you're making an educated guess, and you might get lucky every once in a while. Kind of like an old broken clock my grandma had. We used to kid that it was right twice a day. Well, some of these controllers, they'll get lucky every once in a while, but you could lead to some scenarios where you're overwatering or underwatering. So, for example, today, those who joined the call earlier saw that, or heard me mention that we have some unseasonably high temperatures here in Vegas. We should be this time of year about 78 degrees. We're going to hit close to 100 today. If I had a controller that was using historical data, I could be burning up my landscape right now. Or it could be the other way around. I could be unseasonably cool, and the controller thinks, well, hey, based on history, it should be, I need to apply a lot of water. So you have to have real-time ET. That becomes even more important now. I mean, not to wade into the politics of it. You can argue all the day long why the climate is changing, but the fact is the climate is changing. We see it. The climate always, this guy's in a constant state of flux. And so as we're seeing these swings, and maybe the patterns aren't sticking to what they had been historically, it's even more important now than ever to have real-time weather data, real-time ET.
So Andy, that brings up two things for me, right? And the first one is, is this based on is this based on a baseline schedule? I mean, you could have real-time ET, but somebody could just program in a bad schedule and it would adjust off that. So, I mean, is this a factor too?
It's absolutely a factor. It's interesting. You look at the slide on the screen now, smart, smarter, and smartest. As you move from smart to smarter, a smart controller is going to have a baseline schedule that's going to be manipulated up or down, a percent based on historical ET. As you get into smarter, you're then creating a schedule rather than entering a schedule. You are creating a schedule based on weather. So that becomes important as well. That development of a custom schedule specific to the weather that you're facing. And again, it all goes back to not just the weather, but the horticultural science, the plant material, the root depth, the soil, the soil type, the interplay, the slopes, all these things come into play that make it they really get you out of the smart into the smarter range.
Right, and so then we're hearing quite a bit these days about Jane Unity and this whole idea of predictive analytics. Yeah. How does this work into Daily Adjust, and how is that beneficial to a contractor?
Right. So now we're moving from smarter into smartest. I like to use the analogy. It's hard to drive a car looking through the rear view, and that's effectively what you're doing when you are looking at yesterday's weather, or even 50 years historic. Even if you're monitoring yesterday's weather live, you're still looking through the rear view. With predictive analytics, we're now able to look forward. And you go back to that analogy of driving a car, being able to see what's coming, you're going to be able to react in a way that not only saves water, which saves money, but also protects your landscape investment. Landscape is an asset, and very, very few people, I think, really manage the landscape as an asset. They look at it as, it's a cost or something that looks good, looks pretty, makes me feel good. But it is an asset, and we should be managing it and using the water to increase the value of that asset. And that predictive analytics helps us not only save water, not only save money, but improve the health, or in other words, improve the value of our asset.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, I think especially this time of year, and as we were talking, you were saying it was over 100 there today, and it was cold and rainy last week. And I certainly know the contractors I spoke to in Phoenix last week were having the same experience. And I think about that and I say, man, if my controller knows the temperatures are really going to increase over the next 7 days, and they can increase the frequency of water, then it's going to be a lot less stress on that asset or on the landscape. And that's going to leave me with a much better looking landscape. And if I'm a contractor, my name's on my truck, And that's, that's my reputation. I want to have the best looking landscape. So, boy, I see how you've got to look forward. And then equally true in the fall or on the days when it's going to cool off. San Diego was hot last week. It's overcast today. We need to stair step down now. And if you're looking forward instead of behind, you can see, hey, it's going to cool off in a couple days. We don't have to water as frequently, where if we're just looking at today or the past few days when it's been really hot, we're watering more frequently. So this is where some of the biggest savings are. So yeah, I love the predictive analytics and that stair step up and then the stair step down.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Phoenix and Vegas. In the desert, you see this problem specifically in the spring and the fall when you have those wild temperature swings. This time of year, I can guarantee you there is a contractor in Vegas this week. This week in Vegas, even though we're at 100 degrees, we are under watering restrictions. We are still only able to water 3 days a week. And I guarantee there's a contractor out there who has a smart controller. And the controller says, okay, today's Monday. I don't hit my trigger watering event yet. I don't need to water. And then Tuesday comes along and the smart controller says, oh, I need to water. I hit my trigger event, but it's a block day. It's municipal restriction. The controller doesn't water. Wednesday comes around. It finally decides to water. By then, you've hit what's called the permanent wilting point. You've gone too long without water. The landscape starts to look bad. Now, this is a real life scenario we face all the time as contractors, specifically in the desert. And what contractors will do to work around this, they then go into the controller and they say, okay, I want to water to 125% ET. I want to water to 150% ET, which works, but you end up in the long run using more water than you would otherwise. So when we get into predictive analytics, Jane Unity, this machine learning, this artificial intelligence, when you have a controller that says, okay, today's Monday, I don't need to water. I'm doing well. However, based on the weather tomorrow, I'm going to need to water tomorrow, but tomorrow's a block day. In order to make it through tomorrow and then get the water and then be able to water again on Wednesday, I better put a little extra water down today so I can bridge that gap. You no longer have to go to 125% or 150% ET. You're able to water, you're able to maximize the efficient use of the water, but also protect the health of the plants. You can't do that without predictive analytics. The same could be said of a rain event. I could say, hey, you know what, the controller looks at the landscape and says, I need to water today, but 80% chance of rain tomorrow. I'm going to get 2 inches of rain over an 8 to 10 hour period of time. Maybe I'm going to hold off. And so that goes on both ways, both on the water conservation and on the plant protection. So that predictive analytics solves real life issues that contractors face.
So is it fair to say, Andy, your number one is daily adjustments, but that has a subheading of it's got to be daily adjustments off of real ET and have predictive analytics. Yeah,
and I mean we could dial real ET predictive analytics and really do a lot of our regression analysis deeper into what that all means. But I think to sum it up, absolutely, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from DJ Caldwell, and he's asking, what happens if the predictive analytics is showing a rain event that doesn't happen?
That's great. The controller can look at that then. So that's the value of using real-time data. If I say, hey, I got an 80% chance of rain, the controller can say, okay, let me see what happens. I can then measure the weather on that day. Did it happen? Did it not happen? And adjust. So that it comes back to the importance of daily adjustments, or take it to the next level. What about hourly adjustments? What about hourly monitoring of this stuff and saying, okay, I can see how this is changing. Now I know how to adjust the next schedule. So looking at what actually happened, predicting what's going to happen, and then reacting on what actually happened becomes a powerful tool.
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? Because we keep on getting longer on this, right? So we're at a daily adjust of real-time ET with predictive analytics, and now we have based on hourly reporting of weather.
Well, it's funny because we went from you look at the progression of irrigation with controllers. back in the day, I don't think many people ever changed their controller. They just set it. And I have a couple of neighbors, embarrassingly, in 10 years, they've never changed their controller from when the builder had it running 10 minutes a day, every single day. It doesn't matter if it's sun or shine, they're cold, right? So we've gone from that to, okay, now a contractor might go out and adjust quarterly. Good ones might be adjusting monthly. The very best of the best might be adjusting on a monthly or weekly basis. But now we're getting into not just a daily adjustment, but hourly monitoring of this, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There's nothing else like it. And that's when you get into smartest. That is the smartest technology available. That is machine learning. That is, you can't do that. A human could do it, but you'd have to hire an entire team, right? I'll show you a slide. Oh, it's not advancing here, but I had a slide that showed an entire team of people that it would take to do what one controller could do. And that is irrigation management at its smartest. And that's where we need to be.
Yeah, no, that's really important, right? Because look, this is how you save your customers the most amount of money. And we know how much water is being wasted in a typical commercial or HOA landscape. So if you can show those savings to your customers, maybe they're not so worried about that monthly maintenance fee, and maybe they'll look at the overall costs, and you'll win a lot more business at higher margins, right?
Absolutely. And I apologize. I prepared a few slides in advance, kind of anticipating some of the questions, things would come up, and slides aren't advancing, so I apologize to those guys out there. But Richard, you said something interesting at the beginning of this, and I kind of want to go back to it, talking about contractors and what they're able to do, and kind of you mentioned the guy who ownership management came to him and said, you got to reduce expenses by 50%. That's never a position you want to be in. If I were a contractor in this environment, in 2008, I worked for a contractor. There is an opportunity to retain the work you have and grow. If I were a contractor in this environment, I would be using this irrigation technology. I'd use ET water. I would introduce that to my clients. I would show them the potential it could save them in money, and I would offer that to them as part of a 3-year management contract. So I'm locking in that work for 3 years, but I'm also guaranteeing them a savings. And I know there are contractors who are doing that without a recession going on, and they were having a lot of success with that. In economic turmoil, that approach, I think I saw it in 2008. I know in this environment it will work as well. So I just want to kind of touch on a point you made earlier, Richard, that it's a tough environment, but I know contractors can use this not only to save their customers water, but to retain contracts. Yeah,
that's really a good point, Andy. So, look, contractors can retain customers better. They can find new business. The other thing I think about when I think about a smart controller, and it's really a basic, I know you have an opinion on this, and that is, the remote management. Right, what that gives the contractor the ability to do is really big.
Yeah, remote management it's. I remember my dad bought a pickup truck in 1978, something like that. He said that he bought it, and then the way he negotiated with the dealer was he got them to include air conditioning, factory installed air conditioning in that truck, right? So back then that was a big feature. Now.
And it was, you want air conditioning or a radio, right?
Yeah.
You got one or the other.
That's kind of how it is with this remote access. I think most smart controllers, I had a contractor once tell me, I was talking about remote access, like everybody offers remote access. Well, that's good. You should have remote access. It does make your job easier. What can you do remotely though? Everybody's got remote access. What can you do with it?
Yeah, I think that's the key, how they use it, right? And how it saves them money. Because if you're thinking about putting a guy on the road to program controllers because the weather changed from cloudy last week to really hot this week, and they have to go out and adjust, you're looking at mileage, they're hourly, visiting all the controllers are managing. The return on investment on a smart controller just for that part of it is huge. right? It happens very quickly in just a matter of a few months to the contractor. But the thing I like about the hermit crab, the ET Water hermit crab, is it does give you that remote capability at the lowest price point. And so the ability to be able to hook up a hermit crab, for example, to any other commercial or standard controller and turn it into a smart controller for that remote connection, I think is really big.
You know what? You hit the nail right on the head. The hermit crab, with what you're able to do at the price point you're able to do it at, that becomes the best value, right? If value is what you get for the price you pay, there is no greater value than that hermit crab.
Yeah. So, well, Andy, what else do you think is important to make a smart controller smart?
Well, so I got a few items here. I think it's important to consider. We've talked a lot about ET, right? And how the controller adjusts, how frequently it adjusts. But I think one thing that makes a smart controller, when you go from smart to smartest, you got to ask yourself, how is ET calculated, right? We talked about historical ET and how that's not very accurate. We talked a little bit about those 4 points of data that most people use: the temperature, the wind speed, humidity, and solar radiation. But I wonder how many contractors out there would be surprised to know there are 17 additional pieces of information that affect ET. Is your smart controller using just 4, or is it using all 17, right? Again, and how ET is calculated, are you just using yesterday's data, or using today's data on an hourly basis and tomorrow's predicted? So I think you need to ask yourself, how is ET calculated? And then when you ask yourself, okay, how is ET calculated? The next step you're going to ask is, well, where does this data, where is the data calculated? And we live in an environment where there's more and more data, big data, right? This becomes this is something we hear about all the time. Most controllers are limited in how much they can actually calculate. One thing that makes ET Water unique is we're the only irrigation controller that is truly doing calculations in the cloud. When you're doing calculations in the cloud, you're doing vast amounts of calculations on a large server, more powerful computer versus a small computer and a controller. And when you're able to make greater and greater calculations, you can dump more and more data in, not just terrestrial weather station data, but satellite weather data, Doppler, radar weather modeling starts to come into play. You can do some very, very powerful things that you otherwise couldn't do at the controller level. So asking yourself where that is calculated becomes important.
So Andy, one thing that scares me about this though is, my gosh, 17 weather variables, right? All this other information you've been talking about. Seems like it's probably pretty impossible to set one of these things up. What about the setup on a smart controller? Is that, am I talking about hours to get going here?
I would hope that somebody listening to all this, if you really got deep into this, you would think, man, this is overwhelming. There's no way I can digest all this. I don't know this information. I would have to hire 25 people, scientists and computer geniuses and horticulturists and botanists and all these people just to be able to ask myself, how often do I water my grass and how long do I let it run, right? But the beauty of ET Water is it is simple. This is the beauty of machine learning, of artificial intelligence. Out of the box with a hermit crab, in 10 minutes you're set up, ready to go.
Yeah,
it really is that simple. And I'll just leave it at that. Out of the box, 10 minutes you're set up and it's ready to go.
Yeah. So and most importantly to me on that standpoint is no call to a customer care person, right? Because a lot of times I'm working after hours or I'm working on the weekend or very early in the morning, and I don't have to make that call to customer care. I push that button on the ET Water controller. I grab that serial number. I go online and I'm able to activate it and be working without having to talk to somebody. And that's really what I appreciate as far as time savings on my day. I mean, I've always got more to do than I've got time. And that's a huge benefit to me.
Well, how often, Richard, have you heard somebody say, you're talking to them, how you doing? They say, oh, I'm busy, man. If there were 10 of me, then I could be so much more productive. Well, that's what this does. You're allowing a machine to make a decision for you that you don't have to make. You can turn it over to a technology that takes care of it for you, so you can focus on maybe some higher level stuff like sharpening lawnmower blade, whatever it is. I mean, as an account manager, you had to be an expert in so many different things, from accounting to blade sharpening to you name it. It was there's always something to work on. Let irrigation management be managed by the smartest technology, by a machine, let the technology work for you. That's really how you do more with less.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm seeing too these days, Andy, is a lot of people have had challenges with smart controllers because they say, well, they're not set it and forget it, and they're not. You do have to do your inspections. You're going to have some variables. You're going to have to make some adjustments. And that's really key, being able to adjust because not every irrigation system's designed perfectly. They're not installed perfectly, and they're not maintained perfectly. So you have to have that adjustment ability. And so for me, another really important factor in making a smart controller is the idea of getting reports. But what I found in the past is if the report's just available and sitting there, I may or may not go after it on a regular basis. I may not go looking for it. And certainly if I'm managing a lot of computers or a lot of controllers, I may not be doing that. These days there's so many dashboards. I always say I need an app for my apps, right, to manage all that. So the reporting's important to me, but then I think it's really important to have that reporting pushed to you. And that way, if I'm a contractor, I can push it to me, I can push it to my property managers, the board members on the HOA, and I can start having some really meaningful conversations about smart controllers. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you have a report structure, I mean, going and looking up data, I mean, is one thing, but if I can get an email that says, hey, look at, you got a valve short, or, solenoid is out, or you're not applying enough water. We got a flow monitor in there, or maybe you're applying too much water. It can go both ways. Or hey, you're not tracking within budget. Or hey, here's a report just showing you the moisture balance in a particular zone. I mean, this reporting being pushed to you becomes a powerful tool. And not only because you can make decisions then on the fly rather than having to go back retroactively and say, okay, what's going on? Let me dig through the report. But I think it helps keep water management at the top of mind. If I'm waking up and I see these reports on a daily basis, and I'm talking to my customer, I can say, hey, by the way, we're tracking, we're under budget on water, or hey, we're going through a hot spell. Just be prepared. We're going to use a little bit more water than normal. Here's the data that dictates why. So you look better to your customer, and it's more top of mind. You're going to be able to better do your job versus being reactive. It's the proactive versus reactive, and those push reports help you be more proactive.
Yeah, I think so. And then, what was the temperature percentage higher this year in Las Vegas than last year?
Yeah, no, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know we are on track this year to have the hottest year ever. April is going to be the hottest April ever. I mean, we're 20 degrees higher today than we would be normally. So
right.
Water budgets are probably going to go up. A lot of boards are becoming, a lot of contractors saying, why did I use more water? The smart contractors are going to be able to say, you use this water because of these weather variables, and here's the reason why. They'll have an answer. The guys will struggle that don't have this, and they're going to be scratching their heads saying, well, hey, Jimmy, go take 1 minute off every zone. That's how we reduce the water usage by 10%. And in so doing, they'll impact negatively the health of the landscape material, and things will really begin to spiral out of control.
Yeah, I think that's really key, right? Because just because you have a smart controller doesn't mean you save water every year over the prior year. It could get hotter. The weather in ET isn't stagnant. It's very fluid. So it could be more. And if reports are being pushed to my customers saying, you know what, you're using more water this year, but look at the ET and they can get that concept. And I think I'm going to have happier customers and less of those bad phone calls I used to get.
Well, here's another good analogy. You've heard the term skinny fat, right? There's people who they want to lose weight, but in losing weight, they lose muscle and they end up less healthy, right? We don't want to be skinny fat with water management as well. We want to use water efficiently, not without negatively impacting the health of the plant material, reducing the value of the asset. So the question becomes, how do we maximize health and maximize efficiency in water usage, get the biggest bang for the buck, maximizing it goes back to value, right? How do we get the most value out of it? And that's really the way we should be using these smart controllers. I mean, I can take your water bill down to zero. Just turn off the backflow, right? But what's that going to do to your asset? That doesn't help us.
Right.
We've got to keep both of those in mind as we're managing this.
Yeah. So Andy, if I'm a contractor who hasn't really been selling smart controllers to my customers or promoting them or not working water management as much as I wanted to, or even if I am, but I'd like a little boost, can they team up with somebody at Jane and get a hand doing this?
Absolutely. And man, now my slides are advanced. I apologize, guys. I had some of this, but here at the end, of course, now they advance, but here at the very end, my email address, my cell phone. Call me. I don't know it all, but amongst all of us at Jane, I think we will be able to answer any question you have. I have been I know what it's like to have to manage water, to have to live up to account management expectations, managing a board of directors. It's very demanding. I know what it's like to be in your shoes there. I've sold smart controllers before. We can help walk you through the process. We can help you put together a pretty killer proposal that puts you in a position not just to win more work, but retain existing work, especially in an environment that is going to get more and more competitive. I will say this to all the contractors out there. I'm seeing the national and large regional firms, they are amping up their hiring of their sales team. And they're doing that because they're going to use this downturn as a time to attack and grow their business. So be prepared and use water management as a tool to protect your work, or go out and attack their stuff, right? So you being strategic there, we can help you with that. We've got a great team of guys that experienced in not just water management, but landscape management as well. We'll help you figure this stuff out. My contact information is up there. Email, cell phone. That's my cell phone as well. So you can call or text or email, and we will find the resources to help you implement this technology to the greatest benefit, not just to you, but to your customers as well.
Yeah. Andy, you've been a great guest today. I really appreciate your time and all your knowledge. And I really like the things you talked about when it comes to what makes a controller really the smartest. And I know everybody's going to be looking for those things in their controllers going forward. And what a generous offer to be so helpful to contractors to really learn this water management business and help them differentiate their businesses from others using water management. We both know how successful that can be. You know, we're also going to send out an email from Andy this afternoon, thanking you guys for participating. And in that, we're going to run a promotion, and that's for a free hermit crab. If you pay for the $239 subscription, we'll give you a free hermit crab. This is the product that connects to any conventional controller and makes it smart. And more importantly, makes it the smartest, because all the factors that Andy talked about being the smartest controller are functions of using the hermit crab and the Jane Unity software. So again, thank you, Andy. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And Andy, any last words you want to pass on?
No, hey, I appreciate everybody's time, and great opportunity to talk water conservation. Look forward to hearing from some of you. So thank you, and thanks for setting this up, Richard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.